Okay, I wanted to take us to chapter 12 to begin. There's a lot talking about time, motion, change, the now, in these few chapters. I'm very much intrigued by this line. This is one on page 125 in the Sachs, or right around 20, so 221a 20, if you have Aristotle by a different translator. Um, ah, and since time is a number, the now and the before and such things are in time in the same way that one and the odd and even are in number. For each of the latter is something belonging to number, and each of the former is something belonging to time. But things are in time as in number, and if this is so, they are surrounded by time just as things in place are by place. And it is clear that to be in time is not to be when time is, any more than to be in motion or in place is to be when motion or place is. For if that is to be in something, all things will be in anything, and the heavens in a millet seed. For at the time when the millet seed is, the heavens are also. But this is incidental, while the other follows necessarily, both for the thing in time, that there be a certain time when it is, and for the thing in motion, that there be then a motion. I'm very much interested in the middle line there. Things are in time as in number, and if this is so, they are surrounded by time, just as things in place are by place. And I guess the part that was curious to me was that Aristotle thought he needed to explain what in meant in the following lines, rather than explain what he means by surrounded. I thought that was very strange. So I'm kind of wondering what people understand about his idea that this things are surrounded by time, just as things in place are by place. Yeah, go for it, James.
Well, I think it has to do with his reference to beings, or at least I wrote that down. Sorry about that. He does talk about beings in some section. Yeah, he has just finished talking about beings. And so in regards to beings, the beings are very much in time, just as they are in place. So it's a natural kind of affinity. We have a natural affinity to place, and we have a natural affinity to time. And of course, time is related to number, and it's related to motion, which means that it's not a condition. So it's not something that sort of varies, where sometimes we're in time, other times we're not in time, time passes. He even says, and one part, I think he says, time doesn't even pass that quickly or slowly. It's kind of like, I wrote down, haha, because people say that nowadays. But the Greek culture was obviously a little different. People had different expressions, and he talks about there's a couple of cultural references in here. So yeah, so that's my idea, is that time is there are aspects of reference to time, which is he says time. To be in time is not to be when time is, any more than to be in motion or in place is to be when motion or place is. In other words, you're either moving or you're not. You're in a place, and you're in a time, and it's not a condition. It's exactly the same relationship we have to place. We exist in time, The time that we experience is always called the now. And, and there's the now can be used as a reference point, whether it's a current reference or a historical reference. So that's all. Just it's relationship of time and being. We're in time and we experience time, and it's not conditional.
Just a follow-up question. So I understand that part, James, but one of the things you said, and kind of one of the clarifications I wanted with this quote was, are there instances where something can be not in a place? Because if there aren't instances where something cannot be in a place, doesn't that also mean there are no instances when a thing is not in time?
It depends on whether it's a being. If it's a physical being, then it's always in a place. If it's something like a concept, the concept the dead horse in this chapter in this book is or in this section is the diagonal of a square. So and he would say, well, it's not a being, and he'd probably say it doesn't belong in a place, but it has a relative place, perhaps relative to the corners of a square, since it's diagonal. So that's all. It's just yeah. As far as beings go, I had a big question mark whenever he says non-beings. I kind of like light up, and I even did some religious chat GPT today to check in on Shintoism. That's one of my favorite religions. So, and because I like its animism, and yeah. So this is a this is a that but the relations to non-being are kind of like that. Anything we could talk about that we don't assign a place to would be a non-being. Yeah.
Thank you, James. David?
He doesn't seem to be treating time as a thing, which is interesting. But it works the way numbers work. So he points out in what cases there are similarities and differences in using numbers and measuring, which you apply to movement in space, in place. But a thing can be at rest, and it's still in that measurable numerical space. But time doesn't have rest in that same, you can't stay in the same time. So there's a difference between the way things are in space and time, but you're still surrounded by the before and after, which is like the way you are in place. That's sort of what I was seeing.
Okay. Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to back up like a couple of lines from where you started, because I think he's drawing a distinction which we may not have fully up there on 10. For to be in time is one of two things. So we're gonna have two alternatives here. Either it's to be when time is, right. The other alternative is, or something corresponding to what we say of some things that they are in number. This means that something is a part of or attribute or generally something belonging to number, or else that there's a number of it. And since time is a number, the now and the before and all these things, those are so the odd and the even. Well, the odd and the even, none of those are numbers for the Greeks. The first thing even says here that 2 is the first number, because 1 is really just the unit by which numbers are sort of constructed. So none of those are actual numbers, but there are things that are associated with numbers. So like the now and before, neither of those is going to be time, but time is what is measured. And also in here, he was also earlier, he'd drawn the distinction between number. There's a difference between arithmetic and magnitude, and David was alluding to this when he was talking about measuring things. When you're starting measuring continuums, that's magnitude, which is not number. Numbers is something built up out of units. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are numbers. Magnitude is something that can be measured by something between 2 points, right? Time is like this magnitude. So it can be when you have a first a now and then a later point in time. Now you have something you can measure in time. And that's what to be surrounded in time is to be between a previous and a something before you and after you, right? That's to be surrounded in time. Distances, places. So the times are not really necessarily the points, the ticks of the clock, but they are kind of like what is in between those, I think.
Go for it, James.
Yeah, I was going to remark on the culture in Aristotle's time. I think I really think it was a different culture. He often talks about how we measure time in distance, or no, we measure motion in time. So in other words, it's the rock is rolling down the hill. It rolled a day, or it rolled 20 seconds or something like that. So how far is it? Oh, it's about 20 seconds. This would probably be the way they were talking about, like walking along a path. Well, how long is the path to the agora? Well, it's about a half hour. So that's how long it is. So they probably didn't say things like it's a half a meter or something like it's a meter from here to there, or a mile, half a mile or something. They probably just said it's half of that. And if you're going to another town that you hadn't traveled to before, you'd ask somebody, how far is it? And they'd how far is it to Anaxis? And they'd say it's 2 pythiums or something like that. It's if they measure one thing in terms of another, perhaps. So there's this relativity probably comes along much more often in the culture. And I just wanted to add to what Peter was saying. What the reference to number as integers strikes me as a mathematical kind of convention. When he speaks of number, he's definitely talking integer, and starting with number 2, of course. But he does have a section where he says it could be 2 or 1, depending on what school you come from. But and then the other kind of number, of course, is the ratio, which he knew about ratio. And he talks about magnitude, right? So magnitude would be have to do with ratios. In other words, half the distance to the agora, or a third of the distance to the agora, or half the day, something like that, right? So those would be the units of time that are measured in magnitude. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, James. Let's go to Brent.
Yes, I guess a corollary of your question would be the question, are eternal beings, like the prime mover or the unmoved mover, are they in time? And do we measure time, or do we understand time through eternity? And I think that Plato, in one of his dialogues, says that time is a mirror of eternity. I think that Aristotle would fundamentally disagree with that he would say that eternal beings are not in time, that what is in time is something that has to do with a before and an after, and it has a before and after in relationship to a now. We have no experience of eternity. Consequently, we cannot experience time through eternity. I think later on in maybe it's not chapter 12, but later on in this reading assignment, he talks about the circularity or the spherical circle as something that has to do with time. But I don't think he says thereby, that things go in a circle, that time goes in a circle, that life goes in a circle. I don't think he's thereby saying that, therefore, these eternal things, like the eternal circular motion of the heavens, of the stars and of the moon and of the sun, that the circularity is not necessarily eternity, that still, in order to understand time, we have to have a concept of the now and of the moment. you know, I don't want to go off on a corollary, but it's almost like in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra in the chapter on the vision and the riddle. He talks about time as eternal, as something that stretches back to eternity and stretches forward to eternity. But he says here in this particular chapter on the vision and the riddle that time cannot be measured by these eternities. They can only be measured by the moment, which I think Heidegger talks about, the moment of vision. We have to have a moment. We have to have an orientation to a now and all the things that go with a now in order to be able to experience time. Thank you.
I think, Brent, I mean, as far as what you're talking about is in terms of eternity, he says at the very bottom of that same page, 2221b, time in itself is a cause rather of destruction. And that's kind of the opening thesis for, you know, why something that that always are not in time. That's what he says, but we're just going to throw that in there. Dave?
I thought that was very well explicated by Brent, and just to give him some textual support for the idea that the eternal is not in time, just at the very bottom of the page that we're currently on, the second to last sentence basically says exactly what Brent just told us. It is clear that things that always are, insofar as they always are not in time, for they are not surrounded by time, nor is the being of them measured by time. I thought that was a very intriguing sentence. And then you focused on the surrounding element, but for me, I was very intrigued by his stance that the heavens are not in a millet seed, because you can find many thinkers who would argue they are in a millet seed and that they're in absolutely everything. And all the way up to modern day with, like, you know, theories of the holographic universe or the unified field theory, there is some support for that. So Aristotle clearly coming down against these, that just to me reinforces this idea that he's sort of the classical physics of philosophy, and he's right up against the limits, and we're just waiting for someone to take us into that next quantum realm. So I just wanted to add those two things. And the idea about not finding the heavens in a millet seed, to me, was pretty interesting.
Yeah, thank you about that, Dave. So then I guess the discussion then about it being surrounded by time and by place, I guess I would just kind of re-ask that question though about, you know, is he using that similarity to place as like kind of a, you know, it's kind of similar to this, you know, just a way of helping us, because, you know, to go back to my question, a thing is always in place, but a thing, I mean, to contrast it by saying that something that's eternal does not have a before and after, cannot be measured in time because they're not surrounded by time, and the being of them is not measured by time. So then is that to say that something that is in time, once it is in time, it's always in time? Like, what would something, like, he gives a definition of what something not in time is, but I'm still kind of a little bit unclear about what happens to things when they are no longer in time. Or is that even possible? Because he also describes time as a cause of destruction. So if something is destroyed, then what happens to the time that was surrounding it? And I have another question that goes off of this, but I'd love to hear what David and James have to say.
Yeah, my first whack at that pitch would be time essentially entails there being motion. So things that can't change, that's eternal, are not, they don't have their being in this temporal way. So you're not going to have something all of a sudden turn into a thing that changes and be different from what it is. And so if its essence is that it's fixed, it's not in time, it's not going to have the other aspect at the same, as part of the same essential thing. Does that answer the lob? No?
No, because I mean, if that's it, then a thing in time is always in time.
Yeah.
because you're being, and the part that David highlighted about the being of them measured by time, there's like who's measuring still. Like if I don't know if you could dig up George Washington's corpse, but say you can't, and say the wood of his casket has like migrated into the soil, like there's a part of him that's still in time, right? Like at what point does it stop being in time? I
Well,
understand you said change. That's why I bring this back up, because like if the bones like disintegrate into the soil, like that's a change. So when does it stop changing, and what happens at that point?
yeah, well, he talks about two separate things later on. He talks about them each happening in their own kind of motion.
Yep.
But that is not a real separation. They are actually happening in the same time. So they each in our lingo, they each have their proper time. They're watching their own clocks, but there's a time that consumes all those events, which is the before and after them. So I George Washington ceasing to be alive and the material changing in various ways, I don't see. He no longer is. I mean, I don't see that there's a problem with that. He was not an eternal thing, right? So the motion that was the decay took effect and ceased his being a thing.
James?
Yeah, we still have his wooden teeth, David, and we might still have his some of the scalps that he took. But yeah, when he was an Indian fighter.
Well, James, it's funny, but the his there is equivocal because can he possess anything? And it's a funny. You're using the language in an interesting way.
The way we use language, yeah, we're interesting people.
Exactly right.
We're an
so
interesting species. I can't
brings
help
up the question. So does he exist in that sense? Which I think is
Yeah.
a human question.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, language is distinguished. Let's put it that way. Language use is always distinguished. Oh, to mention I want to get to your question, but I wanted to get to the three attributes of time. He says at 220B, line number, not line 26. He says, similarly with time and motion, by the time we measure the motion and by the motion, the time, and this happens reasonably, for the motion follows the magnitude and the time follows the motion in being this much and continuous and divisible. So these, and for since magnitude has these attributes, so these are the attributes of magnitude, this much, the continuous and the divisible. And this is what my earlier comment, this is what mathematicians call the real now. This is the domain of the real. So mathematically speaking, and but this is the latest inheritance, from Aristotle. But this was Aristotle's concept: this much, the continuous and the divisible. Motion receives them, and through the motion, the time receives them. So time has the attributes of magnitude, which it receives through motion. And the question was about the supernatural, I think, and or what happens to something that passes away time-wise. So time is not a condition. It's always something that surrounds beings in time. So beings in time, and Aristotle's definition, of course, is that something is in motion, and then the being of motion becomes a being in time, the being, and that is the being measured of the being of it. So that is Aristotle's definition of being in time. And so this being in time is not optional for real beings, but anything that is destroyed, of course, is non-being, right? Just as if something never came, it's as if something never came into being. It's non-being. And his example, one of the examples he gives is Homer. Homer is an ancient Greek that came hundreds of years before Aristotle. And so he could sort of like talk about him in the past tense, but it's not that he wasn't in time, but that something happened, which was an event happened, which was the end of his life, his death, and and that has a particular relationship to Aristotle in time. But so the being of Homer is still in time, even though physically, just like everything, he is destroyed because the Aristotle says the nature of time is destruction. For some reason, he knew about entropy. It's kind of like astounding.
Thank you, James. Peter.
Yeah, I want to get back to your topic about like if something's in time, is it stuck in time, can never go out of time? You go to the very first lines of chapter 11, that would be on page 120 on there. I threw it in the chat, but it's like he brings up the example of going to sleep and waking up. And according to his definition, if we just read it, it says, but neither is there time without change. For whenever we ourselves are not changing at all in our thinking, or are unaware of our changing, it does not seem to us that time has happened. So if we're sleeping, or if I'm in a stupor just staring out the window or something, time might stop for me. And I think is a possibility he might be raising there. And what happens when we go to sleep and then we wake up?
So that was my second question. Yeah, David, I'll go right to you. I'm not going to speak much.
Ask your question, because I want to talk about what you just said.
Yeah, so I was wondering, and I thought David brought it up too, is if he's talking about a personal time and an objective time. And I think, David, the situation you brought up, where it's saying, like, there was that example where he's saying, so-and-so, this might be a good example where, someone's thought, wanders away from them, but time is still happening. But for them internally, like I thought Peter was bringing up, it seems that time might have stopped. Like if they're daydreaming, they don't realize. I mean, I have a third of my class has ADHD, and I'm constantly like, do you know how much time you spent setting this out? Let me tell you, 27 minutes. What were you doing? Literally the other day, I broke down a span of 20 minutes with these two children. It's like, you've done 2 problems in 20 minutes. Let's do one together and see how long it takes. Oh, it takes 25 seconds. So let's talk about what you were doing for the other 19 minutes and 35 seconds. And that's an interesting thing because, there's the objective time that I was bringing in to those 2 kids' awareness. And then it's like, they didn't even know. It's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, maybe we were talking. I was like, well, let's see how long it takes you to do a problem. It's like, oh, it took 25 seconds. So what the fuck were you doing for the other 18 minutes? Go for it, David.
So I would take Aristotle to task in modern terms for not saying, although he's doing it, he's talking about different aspects of time and maybe even different meanings of time and different times. But he isn't saying this is time A, this is time B, this is time C. But he hasn't given them distinct names. My time, subjective time, objective time. Don't know why he's not doing that. Maybe that would cloud the issue in Greek. Maybe that would be, but he says, we talk about it this way. We say no time has passed. We do not realize it is as though no time has elapsed, implying there is a truer point of view. Okay, an objective point of view, there's a different kind of time at play. What seems to you to be temporal, you have to connect to our greater temporality, which is when you went to that field and fell asleep amongst the Sardinians and woke up years later, there really was time that passed. So he's insisting there is an objective time in that claim. So it would be nice to have that label on it and to talk about the other thing, which is the experience of time. No time went by for me. Well, what does that claim mean? Because the physician has to explain that to the person who experienced it. Oh, you didn't have time. Maybe you didn't age, or did you age? Or what does it mean that time did elapse? So I don't know if he's just giving us a compendium of all the usages in Greece of the word time in different cases. You're in time. Oh, we talk that way. When do we say that? Or is he really saying time has these characteristics? Time is an exact concept that I'm going to clarify, which will never move off these tracks? Or is it just in Greece, these are all the notions we've had? I'm not, say I take him to task on it, or maybe we're guilty for compartmentalizing these things. I don't know. But, temporality, Heidegger wants to make a point. This is temporality, not time. And, and then what is time then? Well, it's all these aspects of how we are and how things are in that world we inhabit and existence. So maybe we have to parse it and say, how far did he get?
Well, David, at the bottom of 121, I think he points to that. He says, this is after 20. He says, but we recognize time whenever we mark off a motion, marking it off by means of a before and an after. And that is when we say that time has happened, whenever we take cognizance of the before and after in a motion.
Yeah, so it seems to be each individual can do that and have their subjective claims about time passing. Okay, do these all match up in some way? Okay, it's still an open question, but yeah, you're right. Time is this experience of before, because there's another thing with a sequence, and as though there were numbers, one number comes after another, and the now is in between the before of this. That's this time. It's this line up. But
Peter, do you want to say something quick, and then we'll go to James?
Yeah, I was just about saying, yeah, time is whatever, it seems to me it has a circular definition that time is defined in terms of motion, and motion is kind of defined in terms of time. And that circle, and he doesn't seem to really have a problem with that. He never, at least doesn't clear it up anywhere. And so, but time really is something that's measured. So if I'm asleep and I'm not measuring anything, for me, time doesn't pass. But if you're sitting there watching me, and time is always measured by something circular, he says, right? Roughly like the turning of the heavens, like a day, an hour, or, the sundial slowly moving around. That's another circular motion that they had back then. They didn't have hours really. Well, I mean, they didn't have clocks, certainly.
Okay, thank you, Peter. James?
Yeah, I don't know if Aristotle handles this elsewhere. My feeling is that he definitely links magnitude with motion and time. And magnitude is the measurement of the real. And I think intuitively he understands that magnitude, that integers are the mechanical assumptions about quantity, which result in inequalities. You get 10 dogs and 10 horses, and you have an inequality even though the numbers are the same. And he mentions that a couple of times. And but with magnitude, he may understand that the magnitude is actually the notion of the real, and that's why he prioritizes it as the understanding of the meaning of motion and the what connects time and motion. And I really like the fact that you read that sentence. We recognize time by marking off a motion. He's not talking about a subjective marking off of something. When you mark something off, you're doing a scientific activity. You're basically making sure that you don't get the time wrong the next time you try to estimate. So that's why you mark it off. And everybody doing this together results in a cultural attitude towards time, such as there is if we agree to meet at a certain time, we're probably going to meet at that time and place that we designated and not kind of be sloppy about it. So this idea of cultural specificity, anyway, is contained in the idea of having a scientific or a physical, in Aristotle's terms, physical attitude towards time. And I count 5 definitions in this book. Or in this section. there's 5 different definitions of time. Now, the reason for that is it's Aristotle's part of Aristotle's methodology. He creates a definition. He says we had a bunch of impasses that we're going to have to satisfy. So, but we're going to have to handle them one at a time. And when he he handles one impasse and he creates a definition of time. Then he creates another. Then he deals with another impasse, and during that he creates another definition of time, which builds on the first one. And each definition of time is either similar or building on what came before. So that's all. I just want to say that there's method to Aristotle's madness. You can criticize him for being, a 4th century BC pagan or whatever, follower of whatever, whoever you call it. But the fact is that he had this scientific attitude towards laying out the facts. And I noticed a lot of references that are phenomenological in this piece. In other words, whenever he uses the word seems, that's kind of a clue that he's talking about phenomenology, that people think of these things this way, and that kind of means something. If they think about time this way, it's not really an answer about what time is, but it's a clue as to what we need to investigate, because that's what people are already thinking about when they look at that. And uses the word seems usually to signal that kind of investigation. So that connects them, I think, with modern philosophy, modern philosophers like Hegel, Husserl, and Heidegger. Thank you.
Charles?
I just wanted to, I think of all the definitions, I'd certainly go with the one that time is the measure of motion, because he repeats that one the most often. And also, I think he makes a statement in here that I can't put my finger on right now, that if there is no motion, there is no time. And so that really is his kind of bottom line. But in answer to a question of yours, Garth, a few minutes ago, are there 2 different kinds of times? If you look at 221b, line 28, my translation says this: those things, therefore, which are subject to perishing and becoming, generally those which at one time exist and at another do not, are necessarily in time. And here's the interesting part, I think. For there is a greater time which will extend both beyond their existence and beyond the time which measures their existence. So he's talking there, I think, about the idea that time really is, that time really exists, and it goes beyond individual things that come and go. And the individual things that come and go are in time, and they're still in time once they're even when they're gone. And then I have one more thing, talking about Aristotle's method and the way he does. In line 221b, the first, let's see, I think it is, yes, it's about decaying and time and decay. It says, for time is by its nature the cause rather of decay, since it is the number, of decay, since it is the number of change, and change removes what is. But then he corrects that, or says something different later, toward the end in 222b, in line 25, if I can find that quickly. He says, Still, time does not work even this change. When things are destroyed in time, and here he is talking about the idea of things that are eternal and last for a long time, that it is not time that does this. So in one spot, earlier he kind of said time causes this, and in this spot, then he says that time does not affect this change, that time is merely a measure of these changes. And once again repeats the notion that that time is the measure of motion. Those are just the two things I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Charles. Brent?
Yes, at the bottom of page 121, he talks about, and that is when we say that time has happened, whenever we take cognizance of the before and after in motion. And I highlighted the word cognizance. Like a couple sentences later, he says, for whenever we think the extremes differ from the midpoint, the soul says there are two, and I highlighted that. So he talks about the soul and he talks about cognizance. Obviously, cognizance is a function of the soul. So he brings the soul in here. And I think that taking cognizance of time, when the soul takes cognizance of time in the various ways that it can do that, taking cognizance of time is different from defining time. I think any effort to define time, at least if I think of all the impasses that Aristotle brings up, that any attempt to define time can lead to an impasse. But it still depends upon what the soul is oriented toward, what the soul cognizes in time, its relationship to time, what it is thinking about time at the moment. And there's another line at the top of page 120. It says further, if being coincident in time and neither before nor after means to be in one and the same now, and if the things before and the things and the things after are in this now, then the things that happened 10,000 years ago would be at the same time as the things happening today. Now, the question becomes, are things that happened 10,000 years ago in the same now as us? Well, I don't know about 10,000 years ago. I mean, it is true if what I have to say now is true. Did things that happened in Philadelphia in 1776, are we in the same now? To a certain extent, we are, because the Supreme Court still spends a lot of time deciphering what is meant by the constitutional amendments and by the meaning of the Constitution. Certainly, Martin Luther King Jr. Was talking about the promises made in the Declaration of Independence when he was heading the civil rights. So in this sense, the beginning of something, whether it's the beginning of a country or whatever, determines everything that is to come. So in that sense, the past nows are still present today. So again, here we are talking about the cognizance of time and how the soul is oriented toward time. How are we going to look at time today? Not how are we going to define it today, whether it's Aristotelian or Copernican or Newtonian or Einstein. It's like, how about the soul? The soul has a very big influence upon how time manifests itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Dave?
Brent and I are really on the same wavelength today, because I think the way I read this is Aristotle started off trying to define time in an objective way, but in his argumentation, he continues to encounter the subject. And I'd like to take us to page 129. This is just maybe the third paragraph of chapter 14, and it is line, let's just see, 223A, but number 10, a little bit further down. And he says here, worthy of examination too is how time stands in relation to the soul, and why time seems to be in everything. couple sentences further, we might be at an impasse. Impasse, whenever Aristotle says impasse for me, that's my signal that he's bumping up into that quantum realm, I'll call it, whatever it is, but he's just not there yet. And he says, for it is impossible, and I think you alluded to this, Garth, for there to be a counter, it is also impossible for there to be anything counted. And this reminds me very strongly of the observer effect, and that you can't take a measurement without a measurer. And so there are so many intriguing aspects of this. I've already skipped past 127, that conversation about the circle and convex and concave. That's very interesting too. But this idea of the soul here clearly introduces this subjective idea of time. And it seems to me that he is struggling with this because he's using this word impasse again. That's always, this dialectic, as David points out, he's sort of putting things forward, and in his argumentation, he's just massaging and coming at this from every angle, which is really what I appreciate so much about him. So I found that sentence very interesting. Also, the one after it, it is impossible for there to be a counter, it is impossible for there to be anything counted. Fascinating.
Thank you, Dave. James?
I like that sentence too, but I just wrote down Kant next to it. Anyway, yeah, that's his also put down, that's kind of like after his definition 5. I mean, when he's talking about the time, time is an attribute or state of motion. Now that's new, right? And also, and since there's number to it, well, all these are movable things because all are in place, while time and motion go together both in the course of potentiality and being at work. So now we have like the biggest definition so far of time. And he puts a question mark there, just before he launches into the subjective impasse, which I think you described beautifully, David. Anyway, so I guess I was concerned about I just want to make a comment about the stories in Sardinia and the people sleeping, and you were saying you were sleeping for like a long time kind of idea, right? So this reminds me, and this is subjective too, but this doesn't detract from the realist orientation that Aristotle has and that he stands with. When he talks about it, it's the idea of all creativity. And in my opinion, part of creativity is being able to switch times quickly. If I were a teacher, I think a really excellent teacher would be one that tells his students to go read stories about things that happened in the past. In other words, create this kind of dimensionality to one's sense of time. And part of that would expand the students' creativity, in my opinion. And the unawareness, I forget what he actually said himself about it, but this at chapter 11, the people waking up with stories about the heroes, they join the earlier now and the later now and make them one, taking the in-between on account of being unconscious. So that doesn't mean they were kind of like delusional, but they were aware. I don't know, I didn't read the story, but maybe they were aware that there was a difference between the old now and the new now. And there's so I think this is kind of a constructive idea. I call it an awareness or collapsing between time. Time, and this means that time can be ignored subjectively. In other words, I could decide to not wake up tomorrow, or that wouldn't matter if I woke up tomorrow, and just sort of like, yeah, when you're sick, that happens, and it's part of a deception. And I thought about like deception. One ignores time when one is making a deception. In other words, I didn't know that I had to have submit my paper this week. I'll get it to you next week or something like that. or ignoring events which happened in time. In other words, oh no, I didn't know I owe you 350. I'm sorry about that. So, but it's also poetry. The impetus for poetry is in the Heideggerian sense, and talking about the importance of Holderlin's vision, is to be able to use language in a way that illuminates the path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Charles.
I had a little difficulty in trying to figure out all the various aspects of the idea of now. Does anyone comprehend that in this reading we have today of where and how does the now fit in? It's an in between. It participates in the future and the past, but his analogy with the now and the point escaped me. So I'd like to hear something about that.
Yeah. Do you all, Peter, can you start us off with somewhere in the text?
Yeah, let's see. So
yes, it's
well, he says that the now is not part of time. That's at 220A19.
220. Are you using the sax?
Okay, I took my notes from
Okay.
when I read it, and physically I read the sax. When I read it online, I have the other one. So
So what's the page in the sax?
I don't know. This is
Oh.
220A19.
123, Garth.
Okay, thanks. Go for it.
Because it is, so it says, because it is evident that the now is no part of time, nor the division a part of the movement, any more than the point is a part of the line. Lines, there are no points in a line back in the Greek days. We have an abomination in the modern world where we think points are composed lines, but that's so basically that now is not a time, but the now is what is the time. It's the thing that gives you the before, after. There was a now before, now after. Between those two is what the time is. At 219b10, he says, for the now, whichever now it is the same, though the being for it is distinct, and the now measures time insofar as it is before and after. So the now is the thing that measures the time. It is not the time itself. And the now is not actually in time. He actually says that somewhere too. I don't have the quote handy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Do you know where on 123 James Cook he was reading all that?
Okay, that was near the. Oh, actually, I'm not 100% sure. No, I couldn't find it. No, I missed it.
So which one are you talking about?
Your last
either one.
reference
Okay,
point.
the last one was it 219b10?
No, I think you were talking about 220A, lines 18, 19, and 20.
That was the first quote,
Then
yes.
you were referring to the beginning of the next paragraph, line 21. Insofar then as the now is a boundary, it is not time,
right,
but an absolute of it. Insofar as it numbers, it is number. For boundaries belong only to that which they bound, but number is the number of these horses and belongs to also elsewhere.
Yeah, the boundaries of something are countable. What it bounds, a continuous extension between boundaries itself is not measurable with numbers. It's a magnitude.
Yeah.
Right. So the points are not part of the line. They just bound the line segment.
Yeah, I still can't find it. Sorry.
In my translation in 220, it would be 220A, it would be the one to the end of the second paragraph, beginning of the third.
Our 220A is just all one paragraph.
Oh, okay.
Well, I pasted both the quotes into chat if you want to look at them.
Okay, that's fun. So time is a number, not as of the same point, which is a beginning and an end, or rather as the extremities of a line. And neither is time a number as parts, but both because of what has been said, and further because it is clear that the now is no part of time, nor is a division part of the motion, just as neither is the point any part of the line, but it is two lines that are parts of one line. Is that it?
Yes,
Then, okay. Then, insofar as the now is a limit, it is not time, but an attribute of time. So then the attribute part seems very much. Oh, sorry. James Cook's got his hand up. Go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I primarily wanted to say that I like what Charles was referring to, but this that motion mode time divides things into a before and after, and oh, here it is. Yeah, this is at 219B, line number. Yeah, around line number 10. Just as motion is always other and other, so is time. So in other words, there's a now, right? It's always, Charles, there's a now, which is like right now. And but the fact is that there was a now when I was born, and the now was something that occurred both for my mother and for me. So there's a kind of like a community that is affected naturally by time. And while for me that was kind of like a beginning, which is a special kind of time, for both of us it was the now. And we were both in the future going to have a lot of nows. And he even talks about the now here as a kind of a unity. I think there's a place where he says it's both it's something and a unity. My memory's not that good, but he says just where I just read. The now is present in one way as the same, but another as not the same. Insofar it is in something or other, it is different. Okay. Oh, here it is. And this is what is meant to be now. But whatever being at any one time is the now, it is the same. Now, when he's talking about being, he's talking about existence. That's what he means, right? He's not talking about a thing but whatever thing at any one time. No, he means existence at any one time, being. And as was said, the motion follows the magnitude. As we say, the time follows the motion. And it is likewise with a thing carried along in relation to the point in which we recognize the motion and the before and after in it. So the time is always relative to a particular now, which we could be in the present, of course, but it's also nows that happened before. In other words, it's Aristotle's way of opening up the whole subject of time. There are nows that are in the past that have futures and pasts. There are nows now that have a future and a past. So we could talk about the before and after now, but we can also talk about the before and after George Washington, and the before and after Aristotle, and the before and after our children grow up, whatever. So this is kind of it's kind of like an open discussion. Time is open discussion. It's not, and the now is an open discussion, because we can say, yeah, there's only one now. It's the time that demarcates the future and the past, which Aristotle is talking about in a lot of the text. But at the same time, he's saying the existence of time is the motion of all these objects. And that's what makes it kind of obvious and makes it measurable and makes it always present. And it's not just a straight line, it's a circle too. He talks about time, you know, having something to do with the nature of the sphere or the cosmos. So relating to it that way. So yeah, so I don't find it mysterious at all that there are nows that are relegated to the past, because we're constantly moving in time, we're just like rocks, essentially falling down the hill, except that our motion is much more circuitous. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Dave?
Since we mentioned the circle, I just have to take us to the bottom of page 127. That's 222b. And a circle is a good shape to compare and contrast against a point, I guess. I found some of this almost poetic. He says, and since the now, just as James was saying, since the now is an end and a beginning of time, but not of the same time, but an end of the past and beginning of the future, it would be like the circle, which is in a certain respect in the same place both convex and concave. So also is time always at a beginning and an end. And because of this, it always seems different, for it is not of the same thing, that the now is a beginning and an end. And maybe we can chew on that a little bit.
So by saying it is not of the same thing, that the now is a beginning and an end, I mean, that seems like he's pointing at the idea of it being, of change happening. That thing, I mean, that's what I was understanding there, is that thing is constantly changing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I wrote down they're never going to be identical. The pasts and the futures are never going to be identical. They're always going to be. That's what he's getting at. The pasts and the futures are always going to. And thanks for reading that, Dave. Pete. Yeah, that's there's always a kind of like an originality and a kind of everything is always different, and that's the reason, because the nows never coincide.
Okay, so I guess I'm not speaking of the time part. I'm speaking about the part of this thing. For it is not of the same thing that the now is a beginning and an end. That's kind of where my question is.
Mm-hmm.
Peter?
Well,
or James? Yeah, go for it, James. And we can
well, I mean, the now is just in relation to a period of time. You know, like I can relate the now to my lifetime. I can relate the now to my day. If in my day, there's a past and there's a before and an after in my day. There's a before and after in my life. There's a before and after in the U.S. political culture. There's a which has been mentioned. There's a before and after in quote unquote Western civilization. You know, the beginning and the end is something that occurs in time. And I already talked about like our lives. You know, I already mentioned my life. My life had a beginning, and it's like it's very important, because it marks a kind of like for each of us a kind of a kind of a marker of education and acculturation.
Yeah.
And you know, we relate so much to that timeline, and so that before and after becomes very important, even though there's not a very important before. There's an important before, you know, gestation, but still, it's and the other before that I don't even mention, right, is the idea of ancestors, the idea that we're actually connected to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of befores and a lot of afters, and I think that's what Aristotle is getting at here.
But it's very easy to understand time solely in terms of humans, but time also exists for things outside of humans. No, go for it.
Can I answer the question rather than rambling about other stuff instead? But so
I mean,
the
it wasn't
quote
other
is,
stuff, Peter. I was just following along with this question.
Well, it's things in motion, things in
well,
motion.
let me just read the quote. He has a question about a particular quote. For it is not of the same thing that the now is the beginning and the end. Let me sort of restructure that sentence. Now is the beginning of the future, and now is also the end of the past. So there's two different things that it's of. Right. It's this one point is of both the beginning. It's the beginning of the future and is the end of the past. So those are the two different things. The beginning and the past are the two different things that the now is of. In one way, looking backwards or looking forwards. Just like any line segment, any point will bisect a line segment, right? Or so I think it's just the two things that it is of are beginning and future, or past and future.
But even in the example of that line segment thing, and the point, like something changes once that point is there.
Well, but wait a minute, but this is just a grammatical thing of understanding this sentence here. For it is not of the same thing that the now is the beginning, because and an end, because it's the beginning of the past. Sorry, it's the beginning of the future and the end of the past. Those are two different things. That this one now is of. It's of two different things: the beginning and or the future and the past.
You know what? In our edition, it says, and the now is an end and a beginning of time, but not of the same time,
Exactly.
but an
Past and
end of
future.
the past and a beginning of the future. So in
Right,
other words,
exactly.
it's the beginning of the future, it's the end of the past, and it's not of the same time because the future is a different time from the past.
Right, because that one
the,
now, the current now, as it were, is going to be one mark, and to measure time, you have to have two marks. So, 3 days ago and now measures a segment of the past, and now and 3 days from now measures a different thing of the future. So we have two different things: the 3 days in the past and 3 days in the future that we're measuring using one of the current now as the sort of middle point there, right?
as in all discussions of now, it's always one point.
But I mean, that just gets back to what I was saying at the end of James's thing. Then it's saying that the thing is changing.
What thing? No, the
Whatever
thing
we are measuring is changing. If we're saying 3 days before, 3 days after, that the thing that we are measuring is changing from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
No, we have measured two different things. We've measured 3 days ago and 3 days from now. Those are two different things. Now the fact that now is sliding along, we always think the now is always sliding along, but once you fix a now is Tuesday at 12 o'clock. 3 days prior to that, so that now is not moving anymore, right? If you're going to try and take a continuously moving now, yeah, you have a problem with what you're referencing.
No, I might not be explaining myself correctly. Like I would say, if we're measuring 6 days, then the beginning of that would be one thing, Monday, which is its own thing. And that if we end on Saturday is a completely different thing than Monday.
Right.
So what I'm just trying to say that it seems that he's also saying, and that's why it's like I was be curious to know what the word is and how that sentence is in the Greek, because I feel like Sachs does it on purpose. Like it would have been very easy to just say, for it is not of the same time that the now is a beginning and an end, but he uses the word thing. And I'm just wondering, and it could just be that we're all agreeing and I'm just saying it incorrectly, but that I feel like what's happening is the thing is changing. Whatever the thing is, whether we're measuring the days of the week or we're measuring something else, that through the process of before, now, and after, the thing is changing. That seems in line with him saying, when in line with his talks about time and change.
Yeah,
or time and motion.
That's what he's saying, is that there's a result of time, and that is motion, change, destruction. It's a result. It's the these things are caused in a sense by time, but time isn't really the efficient cause. It's just all these things are caused by going into the by by the after, by the Saturday. By Saturday, I'll be exhausted or something like that. You know, something will happen as a result of time by Saturday, and that's after now. So yeah, there's a consequence to time.
I do have that other translation, if I can just read it real quick. For the now is not the starting point and the end point of the same thing, since otherwise contraries would hold of it at the same time and in the same respect.
They use thing there too, right?
Yeah, right. The future and the past are different things.
Well, I thought that
Well-
future and past, before and after is the way that we measure what's happening with time. It's not, are we saying that the past and the future are things? I don't think Aristotle's saying that.
Well, they're different nows.
We
Garth.
have two different measurements, at least.
Anything that happens in the future is happening in a different now from the present. Anything that happened in the past is happened in a different now from the present. So that's what he means when he says it would be, yeah, it is not the same thing that the now is a beginning. It is not of the same thing that the now is a beginning and an end. If it were, it would be the opposite things at the same time in the same respect. So
One point that divides a continuum of any kind is looking in two different directions down that continuum at the same time. So it does sort of, it can act in two roles, as it were. That one single now, that one little point you put on the line.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like only if you're measuring it does it create that trichotomy.
Sure.
I don't even know.
Well, anytime you put a point down in a continuum, you've cut it into two parts, or you've not necessarily cut it.
Because that's why the sleeping thing comes in again, because a person could. I
don't think sleeping thing comes in here. It's just
no. The part we were reading earlier about Sardinia, and whenever you were bringing up, like, whenever we were talking about the idea if it's subjective or objective, that you could lose track of time, and he says later that it's when you become cognizant of it. So it seems like whenever you are actually measuring it, that's only when the before and after and the now comes into play. If you don't measure it at all, then it's just I don't know what that time is. Like if you have to be cognizant of it, I mean, everyone at some type of level, like, humans, if you threw away the revolution or the rotation of the earth, like humans for a while, like would be like, what the hell? Like, I don't know, in their sleep schedule would be so screwed up. Like there's something natural about, going to sleep when it's nighttime. So time is always there, but it's just interesting if you take away the idea of being cognizant of it, what exactly is that time? Because, mountains form across time, and I guess Aristotle will say they are in time, but they can never be cognizant of a before and after and a now. So what does that do, for, that's why that was the question I really wanted to get to tonight is, are we talking about what times? And I thought David, I wish he was still here, brought this up a lot too. Like, to me, it seemed like there was a subjective time and an objective time, but I don't know how time can be accounted for things that cannot be cognizant of it. James?
I think that's a good point, though, because he has seemed very ambiguous about whether or not there would be time if there was nobody around to measure it.
Yeah. James?
Yeah, I think Aristotle doesn't want time to be subjective. He understands that there's a psychology and that there's people, the legends of Sardinia and the legends of Greece. And here, he talks about the flood at one point. So there's kind of, there's a lot of reference here. He's just talked about the sometime, sometime this happens. So in other words, we have a habit of like just thinking of now in a kind of like a relaxed way. So what's going to happen later? Okay. Oh yeah, later we're going out for dinner. What happened earlier? My boss yelled at me. Can you believe that? Things like that. So, but so it's all kind of like, and it's true that there's this kind of like subjectivity to life, but that doesn't ruin the idea that time is a kind of like a fixed point, or the now is a fixed point relating to the before and after, and that there can be there happens to be time. This question, will time end, right? It's no, probably not, because is motion going to end? That's the point. Is motion going to end? If motion ends, yes, time will end. Is time subjective? No, Aristotle doesn't think so. He thinks everything is physical. So, that's just.
But if time is dependent on a subject, then doesn't that make it subjective?
No, he doesn't think it depends on a subject. He
It
says that.
does.
He says,
A
no, he
a
doesn't. Well,
mountain-
you think that maybe.
No, but a mountain cannot be cognizant of time.
Well, that doesn't matter. Cognition doesn't matter as far as time is concerned.
He
It's
said it
not
in the
in the
book.
species.
James,
He doesn't
said it
say
in the
that.
book.
The reference where I wrote down Kant and Hegel, that is, he is definitely, I'm sorry, I want to get it for you. But he is definitely talking about, here it is. It's page 129, right in the middle of the page. One might come to an impasse if the soul were not, time would be not. That's your question. Okay. It's impossible for there to be a counter. If it's impossible for there to be a counter like you or me, it is also impossible for there to be anything counted. So it is clear that neither can there be a number. In other words, everything disappears. If nobody is cognizant, there's no numbers, there's no time. Everything is just kind of like an interesting conversation we had about a book that was written in the 4th century BC. But that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about physics here. For a number is either to be counted or what is capable of being counted. But if nothing else is of such nature as to count, but the soul and the intelligence in the soul, then it is impossible that time be if soul is not. So the soul disappears, time disappears, and that's your cognizant mountain.
That's what I was saying.
Right, but the point is, but his point is, but there would still be that which time depends on the being of, such as motion. The cognizant soul doesn't matter. If it is possible for it to be without soul, can you have motion without soul? And you have to answer that question for yourself, Garth. But the before and after are an emotion, and insofar as they are counted, there is time. So it's a question. Do you want to say the mountains can't count them? No time. The mountains don't think. No time. What? Fine. But you're going to have to answer that question. Is the motion going to, his analysis is that time depends on motion. And is the motion going to disappear because there's no thinker? Is the notion of magnitude or the real going to disappear because there's nobody thinking it?
But he leaves that wide open.
For each individual, yeah. If you want to look at it that metaphysically, I think so.
I mean, he says if it is possible for it to be without a soul. Like if this can happen, if like something can count motion and it be soulless, then yeah, go for it. But that's going to rule out animals.
But he's saying that these things are, he's posing this as an impasse or as a kind of absurdity. In other words, can we really say that motion stops? In other words, is there an end to the world? Does motion stop? If motion stops, then there's an end to time, and that's kind of the question that he's answering. It's true. It's one of his impasses, but it's related to his definition of time as stemming from motion and stemming from the notion of real numbers, the things that happening in reality having a magnitude. And maybe that reality, maybe that magnitude of beings is actually much more important than the soul. How do you know if you think the soul is the answer to the problem?
Okay.